The witch's refuge. The crisp mountain air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, mingling with the faint aroma of lingering wood smoke from the cabin's hearth. Sunlight filtered through the towering trees, casting long golden beams upon the forest floor, dappling the moss-covered stones and winding roots. Birds chirped in the distance, their melodies weaving through the rustling leaves. Deep within the woods, nestled against the base of a rocky hill, stood a modest cabin, more shack than home, built with strong hands and weary determination, its weathered wood and patched roof standing testament to years of solitude and quiet resilience. Benedict had lived here alone for nearly 5 years now, ever since his wife had left him for another man. The memory still gnawed at him, a dull ache that never truly faded. Once, he had lived in the village, had been a devoted husband, and even dreamed of children, of laughter filling a home that now stood in silence. But betrayal had a way of stripping a man down to his rawest self, leaving only scars and silence. It had hardened him, made him wary of trust, and turned him into a man who preferred the company of trees over people, the rhythm of his axe over meaningless chatter. He found solace in the physical toil, in the predictable pattern of his days, and in the quiet, where the ghosts of his past had less power to haunt him. Each day he woke with the dawn, the cold bite of morning air sharp against his skin as he set out to work. The rhythmic swing of his axe became a meditation, each strike against the wood sending splinters flying, a satisfying crack echoing through the forest. He hauled heavy logs onto his cart, the strain grounding him, giving him purpose in the monotony of his existence. When he ventured to the village on market days, he kept his head down, exchanging curt nods and simple words, never lingering longer than necessary. His interactions were brief, his days predictable, and his nights filled with the quiet creak of trees swaying in the wind, lulling him into a solitude that had once felt like peace, but now bordered on loneliness. But one evening, as he returned home with a fresh haul of wood, something felt wrong. A chill ran down his spine, the hairs on his arms standing on end. The door to his shed was slightly ajar, swaying ever so slightly in the evening breeze. His gut twisted in unease. He never left it open, his brow furrowed as he slowly stepped forward, his grip tightening on his axe, heart pounding a steady rhythm in his chest. Every instinct screamed danger. Someone was inside, lurking in the shadows, waiting. He pushed the door open, muscles tense, breath held, prepared for an intruder. His eyes darted around the dim interior, searching for movement. But what he found instead made him freeze. His heartbeat stuttered, his grip tightening on the axe. The faint glow of moonlight spilled through the gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating a figure in the corner, small and trembling, her eyes wide with fear. A young woman, her body curled tightly in the farthest corner of the shed, trembled in fear. Her blonde curls framed a face that was streaked with dirt, her green eyes wide and glistening with sheer terror. The flickering moonlight caught the rise and fall of her shallow breaths, her fingers clutching at a tattered cloak, as though it was the only thing anchoring her to this world. Her entire posture spoke of exhaustion, of desperation, of a hunted creature cornered with no means of escape. Please, don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're coming." And then he heard it. The sound of armored boots crunching against the forest floor, growing louder. The Inquisition. His pulse thundered in his ears, a relentless drumbeat of fear and urgency. He knew all too well what they did to witches. Burned them alive, drowned them, tore them apart in the name of righteousness. He had seen the stakes in the village square, the charred remains of those who had begged for mercy. The Inquisition made examples of those they deemed heretics, leaving their screams to haunt the memories of all who dared defy them. And anyone caught sheltering one would share the same fate, suffering not just death, but a slow, excruciating one. He had a choice: turn her in or risk everything. Before he could think too much, he grabbed the girl by the wrist and pulled her inside his cabin. "Stay quiet," he ordered before shutting the door behind them. Moments later, there was a knock, a heavy, authoritative knock. Benedict took a steadying breath and opened it. 3 Inquisitors stood before him, clad in dark steel, their expressions hard and merciless. "We're searching for a witch," one of them said. "She was seen in these woods." Benedict leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "I've been out chopping wood all day, haven't seen anyone." The Inquisitor narrowed his eyes, glancing over Benedict's shoulder into the cabin. "Mind if we take a look around?" Benedict tensed. He didn't dare look toward the corner where the woman was hidden beneath a pile of furs. "I do mind," he said gruffly. "My home isn't an inn for the likes of you. If there was a witch near here, she's long gone." For a moment, the Inquisitor studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Then, with a nod, he motioned to his men. "If you see anything, you'll report it, unless you want to be branded a heretic yourself." Benedict said nothing as they turned and disappeared into the trees. Only when the last trace of their presence faded did he let out the breath he'd been holding. He turned back inside. The woman was staring at him, her expression unreadable. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. He ran a hand through his thick dark hair. "Because I hate them more than I fear them." She studied him for a long moment before offering a small, grateful smile. "My name is Elara." Their first day together was an awkward dance of silence and stolen glances. Benedict was used to his solitude, and the presence of another person, especially one as enigmatic as Elara, disrupted his carefully built routine. She moved cautiously, as if afraid any sudden motion would make him change his mind and throw her out. Wanting to offer some comfort, he had run her a warm bath, filling the wooden tub in the corner of the cabin. He left her alone, giving her privacy, and when she emerged, she was wrapped in one of his old shirts, the fabric hanging off her small frame in a way that made her look impossibly delicate. "It's huge on me," she said with a soft chuckle, tugging at the sleeves. "But it's warm. Thank you." Benedict only grunted in response, unsure of how to handle the warmth that spread through his chest at the sight of her. He had lived in solitude for so long that the mere presence of another, especially someone like Elara, unsettled him in ways he couldn't quite understand. The way her delicate frame swam in his old shirt, the way her damp curls framed her face, made something in him stir. Something unfamiliar. Something he hadn't felt in years. He busied himself with chores, but his mind kept drifting back to her, to the way her presence filled the empty spaces in his cabin, in his life. He busied himself with chores, pretending not to notice how the scent of soap and fresh pine now mingled with the air. The day passed slowly, filled with small, awkward exchanges, but for the first time in years, his home no longer felt quite so empty. The next morning, she attempted to help with breakfast, only for Benedict to find her struggling to ignite the fire. "Here," he muttered gruffly, kneeling beside her. He struck the flint with practiced ease, and within seconds, flames licked the dry wood. "Takes a steady hand." Elara looked at him, her lips quirking up in amusement. "So it does. I'll remember that." Throughout the day, he caught her observing him. When he sharpened his axe, when he split logs, when he sat at the table with a wary expression, unsure of what to say. The quiet was thick, but not unbearable. By nightfall, she finally broke it. She stared into the fire, the flickering light dancing in her green eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft as the wind rustling outside, "for not turning me in." Benedict exhaled slowly, watching the flames twist and curl. He didn't reply immediately, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. Finally, he spoke. "You're not the first person I've met who needed saving," he admitted, his voice low and measured. "And probably not the last, but I won't regret it." Elara turned her gaze toward him, studying him as if searching for the truth in his face. "Even if they come for you? Even if they find out?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, filled with equal parts fear and hope. Benedict met her eyes, his jaw tightening. Even then. For a long moment they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Elara swallowed, emotions flickering across her face. Relief, uncertainty, something else he couldn't quite name. "I don't understand why you would take that risk for me." He shifted slightly, rubbing a calloused hand over his face. "Maybe because I've spent so long with nothing to protect. Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything. And maybe—" He hesitated, his gaze flickering to hers. "Maybe because I don't want to be alone anymore." Elara's lips parted slightly as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. And in that moment, something unspoken but undeniable settled between them. An unshakable bond forged in fire and fear, but also perhaps in something more. Days passed, then weeks. Benedict didn't send Elara away. She stayed, keeping to the cabin while he worked. Leaving was not an option. The Inquisition had hung posters of her everywhere, branding her a dangerous witch. Even the village folk whispered of the bounty on her head. If she stepped outside, she would be hunted, dragged to the stake without mercy. But soon he noticed the subtle changes she brought. His once barren home grew warmer. She cleaned, cooked meals that made his stomach full in ways he hadn't felt in years. She found wildflowers and set them by the window, their colors bringing life to the otherwise dull space. More than that, she repaired things he had long ignored. The squeaking doors, the loose floorboards, the dripping sink. The cracks in the walls sealed themselves. The draft that had always crept in during cold nights vanished. Everything seemed to look new, yet still carried the same rustic, masculine charm. He knew she had used magic, though she never admitted it outright. Instead, she simply smiled when he asked, her green eyes twinkling with unspoken secrets. For the first time in years, his cabin truly felt like a home. They talked more cautiously at first, their conversations laced with hesitation and unspoken fears. But as the days turned into weeks, the walls between them slowly crumbled. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Elara sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I was only trying to help," she whispered. "The child was dying, burning with fever. His mother was weeping, begging for a miracle. So, I did what I could. I healed him. And for that, they called me a witch." Benedict studied her, the flickering firelight casting soft shadows across her face. "And you ran," he murmured, more a statement than a question. She nodded. "I had no choice. The Inquisition sees no difference between a healer and a heretic. They only see what they fear." He clenched his jaw, anger stirring in his chest, not at her, but at the cruelty of the world that had forced her into hiding. "You're not a monster," he said firmly. "You're a woman who saved a life." Elara blinked, her green eyes shimmering with something unreadable, gratitude perhaps, or longing. And yet, they would see me burned for it. He found himself drawn to her, to the softness she brought into his world of solitude, to the quiet strength in her voice. She was not just a fugitive. She was a survivor, a woman who had faced death and refused to succumb to it. And for reasons he could not yet fully grasp, he wanted to keep her safe. And one night, as the fire crackled and their eyes met, the air between them grew thick with something unspoken, yet undeniable. Benedict hesitated for only a breath before reaching for her, his rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw, tilting her face upward. Elara's breath hitched, her emerald eyes searching his, pleading, inviting. When their lips met, it was slow at first, uncertain, as though testing the fragile line between hesitation and need. But then the dam broke. The kiss deepened, desperate and aching, filled with the longing of two souls who had waited too long to truly belong to someone. Benedict pulled her against him, feeling the warmth of her body melt into his calloused hands tracing down the curve of her spine, memorizing her. Elara's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, her breath warm against his skin. Every touch ignited something raw and powerful between them, something that had been simmering beneath stolen glances and hesitant conversations. The fire flickered beside them, but it was nothing compared to the heat that burned between them now. When they finally parted, breathless and shaken, Benedict pressed his forehead against hers, his voice husky and low. "You're mine, Elara. No force in this world will take you from me." Elara cupped his face, her thumbs brushing over the rough stubble of his jaw. "And you are mine, Benedict, in this life and the next." From that moment on, there was no turning back. They belonged to each other, bound by something far greater than words, by love, by fate, by the unyielding fire that burned within them both. It started with the nausea. At first, Elara brushed it off as a lingering illness, but when the queasiness worsened each morning, she began to suspect something more. Then came the exhaustion, the heightened sensitivity to smells, and the soreness in her breasts. It wasn't until she realized she hadn't had her monthly bleeding in weeks that the truth settled upon her like a quiet revelation. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, she reached for Benedict's hand and placed it against her belly, where a faint flutter of life stirred within her. Her heart pounded as she met his eyes, a mix of wonder and nervous anticipation washing over her. "Benedict," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath, "we're going to be a family." For a moment he simply stared at her, his amber eyes wide with disbelief. Then, as the realization dawned, a slow, almost disbelieving smile spread across his face. "A family?" he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. He placed his other hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the unspoken promise of new life growing inside her. "Elara, are you certain?" She nodded, her own eyes shimmering with unshed tears, a mix of excitement and lingering fear swirling within them. "I've never been more certain of anything," she whispered, though her voice wavered slightly. The thought of bringing a child into the world filled her with overwhelming joy, but also an underlying fear. What if they were still being hunted? What if their past caught up with them? Yet, as she felt the warmth of Benedict's hand over her belly, steady reassurance in his touch, she let herself embrace the happiness. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted softly. "A family. Safety. You." "I started feeling sick in the mornings, then I realized I hadn't had my bleeding. And my body feels different, Benedict. I know it's true." A deep, rough chuckle escaped him as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if the world itself couldn't pry her away. "We're going to have a child," he murmured against her hair, the words almost surreal on his tongue. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You have given me more than I ever thought I'd have again, Elara. I love you." Elara's breath caught, her heart hammering at his words. "And I love you, Benedict." He kissed her then, soft and reverent as though she were the most precious thing in existence. The fire crackled beside them, wrapping them in its golden glow, but nothing compared to the warmth between them. "I will protect you, both of you," he vowed, "no matter what it takes." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, feeling completely and utterly safe. "Then we will face whatever comes together." But fate was cruel. One evening, one of Benedict's most loyal customers, a merchant from the village, came to him under the cover of dusk, his face grave. "They're asking questions about you, Benedict. The Inquisition is convinced you're hiding her. Posters aren't enough anymore. They're coming, tonight." Benedict's stomach twisted into knots, dread settling deep in his bones. His heart pounded as he rushed back to the cabin, his mind racing through every possible escape route, every place they could hide. What if they were already there? What if he was too late? The thought made his blood run cold. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. Elara and their child depended on him. He wouldn't fail them. Elara was near the fire, her hands resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. She looked up at him, concern flaring in her emerald eyes. "What is it?" "We have to go," he said, his voice firm but filled with urgency. "Now." Before she could respond, the distant sound of hooves and heavy boots thundered through the forest. The Inquisition had arrived. A second later, the door burst open with a violent crack. Benedict barely had time to shove Elara into the hidden space beneath the floorboards before 3 men stormed inside, torches casting eerie shadows against the wooden walls. "Where is she?" one of them barked, eyes scanning the room. Benedict straightened, his fists clenched at his sides. "You burned my shed, tore through my land. Have you not found your phantom yet?" The Inquisitor sneered. "You can't hide her forever. We will find her. And when we do, you'll burn alongside her." The men tore through the cabin, overturning furniture, slashing open the bedding, their heavy boots stomping against the wooden floor. The scent of burning torch oil filled the air, mixing with the damp musk of the forest that clung to the walls. Benedict's heart pounded, each moment stretching unbearably as he remained still, listening. The crack of splintering wood sent a jolt through him as one of the men pried open a storage chest. His palms grew slick with sweat, the only sound in the suffocating silence being the slow, deliberate breaths he forced himself to take. Elara was beneath them, hidden in the floorboards, her own breath barely a whisper. Every second felt like an eternity. If they found her, if they so much as heard the slightest noise, everything would be lost. But Elara remained hidden, silent as death itself. When they found nothing, they left, but not without one final warning. "You won't escape forever." The moment they were gone, Benedict pulled Elara from her hiding spot. "We leave tonight." And so they ran, vanishing into the wilderness as the first flames of their cabin licked the night sky. For days they traveled through the dense forest, following no path, relying only on Benedict's knowledge of the land. When Elara grew too weary, he carried her. When hunger gnawed at them, he hunted. When fear threatened to consume them, he reminded her, "We will be safe. I promise." And finally, after what felt like a lifetime of running, they reached a distant land, far from the reach of the Inquisition. It was a place of untamed beauty. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly before them. A dense forest at their back, offering shelter and familiarity. A river wound its way through the valley, its waters clear and glistening under the sun, promising life and renewal. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of wild flowers and earth, so different from the oppressive atmosphere they had left behind. Here they could breathe. Here they could be free. With newfound hope, they set to work, building a home not just from wood and stone, but from love and the promise of a future untouched by fear. There, among rolling hills and thick forests, they built a new home, stronger, safer, filled with love and hope. It was not just a cabin, it was a place where they could begin again. Months passed, and soon, the cries of a newborn filled the air, breaking the stillness of the night. Elara panted, her body trembling from exhaustion, but as she held the tiny, squirming bundle against her chest, a radiant smile broke through her weary expression. Benedict knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he reached out, gently brushing his fingers against their daughter's soft, delicate skin. "Ella," Elara whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks as she gazed at the infant wrapped in warm linens. "She's perfect." Benedict swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "She looks just like you," he murmured, his voice thick with awe and reverence. But as he gazed at his daughter, something inside him shifted, something deep and irrevocable. He had spent years believing he was meant to live alone, that his heart was too scarred to love again. Yet here she was, this tiny, fragile life cradled in Elara's arms, his to protect and cherish. He traced a single curl on the baby's head, marveling at how something so small could hold such an immense place in his heart. "Elara, she's everything. She changes everything. Elara smiled through her exhaustion, reaching for his hand. She changes us, Benedict. She gives us a new beginning. He let out a shaky breath, pressing his forehead to hers. Then I will spend every day making sure she knows she is safe, that she is loved, that she will never know the loneliness we once did. He traced a single curl on the baby's head, marveling at how something so small could hold such an immense place in his heart. Elara, she's everything. Elara turned her glistening green eyes to him, love radiating in their depths. She has your strength, she murmured, her fingers entwining with his. And your heart. Benedict wrapped his arms around both of them, pressing a reverent kiss to Elara's temple before resting his forehead against hers. She has us, and no one will ever take her away. In that moment, as their daughter nestled between them, they knew that no matter the trials they had faced, love had conquered all. They had not only survived, but had built a future worth fighting for. A family bound by something unbreakable. Elara held their daughter in her arms, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered, Ella. Benedict knelt beside her, gazing at the tiny bundle of life that was the very embodiment of their love and survival. He brushed a soft curl from the baby's face, his heart swelling with overwhelming devotion. She looks just like you. Elara smiled, exhaustion and joy blending in her eyes. She has your strength. Benedict wrapped them both in his arms, pressing a kiss to Elara's temple. She has us, and no one will ever take her away. Together they had defied fate, outrun death, and found peace in a world that had tried to break them. Benedict looked down at Elara and their newborn daughter, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. He had once believed his life would be spent in solitude, burdened by pain and betrayal. But now, holding the family he had never dared to dream of, he knew that every hardship, every sacrifice, had led to this moment. Elara, exhausted but glowing, traced her fingers along Ella's tiny cheek and looked up at him. We made it, Benedict, she whispered. We built something worth living for. He tightened his arms around them both, pressing a kiss to her temple. No, Elara, he murmured. You gave me something worth living for. You and Ella. No force in this world will ever take that from us. The wind outside carried the scent of fresh pine and earth, mingling with the warmth of their fire. Their past had been fraught with danger and sorrow, but their future stretched before them, bright, unyielding, and full of hope. And in their arms they held the proof that love, above all else, was worth the fight.